maintenance and review meeting for Tuesday, March 28th. This meeting is being live streamed via YouTube and also being recorded for a possible playback at a later date. All right, so everyone, welcome. Hope everyone had a couple good weeks since the last time that we met. The first thing on the agenda is the review and approval of the meeting from the minutes from our last meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review them, and any questions? And if
I have no
questions.
questions.
Okay, if no questions, I'll
I
take
guess
a,
I have a question. Just on the motions, there wasn't noted who made them or who seconded them. I don't know how big of a deal.
I didn't know I was supposed to do that.
Yeah,
And,
no worries. I'm just,
and then I
don't
just
know if it's
forgot who it
important.
was. So
okay.
I will do it
It
this
may
time.
not be a big deal, but I just figured I'd
Yeah,
point it
no,
out. that-
Doug pointed that out, but I had no
Okay.
idea 2 weeks
No
later.
worries.
Okay.
All righty.
any other questions? If
No.
not, then I'll take a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve.
So motion by Doug and a second
Second by Maureen.
by Maureen. And because we're on Zoom, we will, I'll do a roll call. So Doug,
Aye.
John,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Robin,
Yes.
Pat Foley. Nope, it says she's on here. Judy. Can you hear me, Judy? Uh-oh. So we can't hear Pat or Judy. Oh. Judy, can you hear us? Oh, you're on mute.
I am no longer on mute.
Hey, there you go.
How are you guys?
Doing all right.
Good. How are you?
Great.
So we still have, I think we still have Pat Foley still on mute.
She has her hand up. I don't know if you saw that. So maybe that's her way of saying yes. So.
Okay. All right, well, it's enough votes to pass anyway, so so we'll leave Pat where we didn't hear Pat. We'll leave her as abstained. All right. Second one is review of the articles that we discussed and are coming on to town warrant for the upcoming town meeting. The first one, and they're Articles 80, 81, and 82. So I can see we'll have a quick night. So on Article 80, that's the one to change the verbiage on the selectmen to the select board. We've already discussed this and voted it. So all of the article's been written and entered in, so that will be on. Article 81.
If I could interject, there might be a word that might have to be changed in the last line.
What is that?
In the last line, it says authorized to approve amendments shall be within. I think that meant to say which shall be within.
So I can check with town council, because town council is the one who actually writes these articles for us.
Yeah.
So I can check with them. Okay, no. Okay. Article 81. So after our discussion, and we had talked about putting this on there for the planning board and their associate member. After our meeting, as Doug was looking into it, talking to town council, looking at the charter, it actually will be a change for the zoning bylaw versus going directly to the planning board. It will still have the same outcome. That article's been written by town council, and it is on as Article 81. But what that will do is that will allow the planning board to have the associate member just like the zoning board does. All right, so that one will go on it. And then Article 82 is the one we talked about to make sure that we can keep this going. It is to extend the ad hoc charter review committee until June 30th of 2024. I know we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting. What we want to make sure that we do is have further discussions on this, and probably for next town meeting before this the ad hoc expires, look to change how this committee is, instead of going forward with 3 people. And we'll have further discussions with the Collins Center to see how some other towns do it. They'd said they've seen anywhere from 7 to 13 members. But this article will allow us to continue to do the work that we've been asked to do. All right. So those are the 3. If there's any questions.
Nope.
No.
All right. So it's good. So we'll listen. We'll get 3 articles on there. It will at least start to bring the attention to people in town that we're working on this. All right. And number 3. So most importantly, been talking with Jim at the Collins Center, and they've put together a presentation for us tonight, and they're going to really lead this the rest of this meeting and this conversation. So with that, I will turn that over to Jim and his team.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just share the screen and I will pull up our presentation. Everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. Excellent. Let me see if I can go big screen. Okay. So this is a presentation regarding a review of finance and public works type organization for various comparable municipalities. We went to and we discussed how they organize their sort of finance departments and their public works type operations. You can see here, these are your comparable municipalities. They include Abington, Auburn, Fairhaven, Hudson, Norton, Pembroke, Somerset, Swansea, and Whitman. And we use the following criteria to determine what would be good comparable municipalities for Rockland. So you're seeing pretty comparable in population, income per capita, equalized valuation per capita, in the ballpark for single family tax bill. Also for their total levies and generally demographics. I'll move on. And so we asked the question, what do best practices look like in financial organization? There are several key indicators that suggest the municipality embraces best practices. There's a designated financial management team, which meets regularly, generally on a monthly basis. And this will include the town administrator or manager, finance director, a school business manager, an accountant or an auditor, the treasurer, collector, assessing department manager, purchasing officer, and an IT director. And this is directly from materials that have been put out by and developed by the Massachusetts Department of Revenue Division of Local Services. There's often the designation of a finance director or a chief financial officer, and they oversee municipal financial operations, financial departments or divisions, and responsible for high-level financial responsibilities like forecasting, policy development, long-term capital planning. Finance director is responsible for budget development and capital planning, and it also features appointed financial officers. This includes town accountant, treasurer, collector, and assessing department manager. And for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to call financial officers those 4 positions. And also best practices of consolidated treasury and collector offices. So for the financial organization, Rockland, elected officials include the Board of Assessors, collector, and treasurer. Appointed officials include the town accountant and the director of assessing. And the director of assessing is appointed by the Board of Assessors. And according to the Rockland Charter, the town administrator is responsible for, quote, the proper administration and development of the annual operating budget process, as well as other high-level financial planning akin to a finance director or a CFO. And that includes financial forecasting and long-range planning, analysis of revenues and expenditures, debt management, and capital planning policies. The town also does not have a designated finance director or chief financial officer technically. So for comparable municipalities, this is sort of a broad rundown. In Rockland's comparable municipalities that we discussed previously, the following is true. Every one of them has combined the treasurer and collector positions, so they each have a treasurer collector. 8 out of the 9 appoint their higher level financial officers, so that includes the assessor, town accountant, and treasurer collector. 5 out of the 9 designate a finance director or a chief financial officer. 4 out of the 9 have consolidated finance departments or a designated finance director. And virtually all of these comparable municipalities appear to be moving towards more centralization and consolidation of financial functions. Also want to note the town of Whitman is moving towards designating the treasurer collector position as the finance director. They just happen to not have done it yet. That's going to be in their warrant articles come May. And then this is some of the research that we were able to collect and just kind of in visual form in a spreadsheet that we've been maintaining. And for public works, there are several key indicators that suggest the municipality has embraced best practices in this field. So consolidation of key functions such as park cemetery maintenance, roads and bridges, stormwater, vehicle maintenance, solid waste collection and disposal. This can also include public facilities, townwide vehicle maintenance, traffic, parking, and water, wastewater. And really, the may comes in, it really depends on the size of a community. You tend to see more centralization and as public works departments grow, or they have special features, like if they have a very large facility and they have the staff that can handle it, they may take on vehicle maintenance for the entirety of the town as opposed to just for public works vehicles. But that's really is on a case-by-case basis, and it's not necessarily a hard and fast rule. But the previous bullet point is really more of a best practice. Public works departments generally embrace all of those things. It also includes appointed officials handling day-to-day management of key functions, centralized appointment capacity in the town administrator manager's office, and policy boards function in an advisory capacity and may assist in long-term planning objectives, and they're not necessarily involved in day-to-day operations. So for public work, yeah,
I'm sorry, Judy Hardigan, can I just interrupt for 1 second?
sure.
I just have one question. In that paradigm, what is the comparison between the towns as to who has a town administrator versus a town manager? And the reason why I'm asking is that currently in our the way our organization works is that we have a town manager who we have a town administrator who reports directly to the Board of Selectmen who are elected. So my question is, of those towns that have a town manager, it seems to me, or at least, and I could be wrong, that town manager has more autonomous functions relating to the financial practices. They have a more administrative function as being able to act aside from an elected board? And I could be totally wrong. It's just a question.
Generally speaking, the town administrator or a town manager is going to be accountable to the select board or a board of selectmen.
Okay.
They're getting appointed by that board. That board really maintains a check on that position, whether it's an administrator or whether it's a manager.
Okay.
Sometimes the difference between a town administrator and a town manager in any given community is just a name. It's the difference between saying administrator versus saying manager. In some instances, towns have embraced the title town manager because they wanted more central authority in that position, and it conveyed as such. In other times, it's just cosmetic. So in that regard, it could be hard to tell, but that's something that we can look into further.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thanks.
All right. Then I'll move on. For Public Works organization in Rockland, Public Works type functions are spread across municipal government in Rockland. The following functions are all their own separate departments. There's the Highway Department, the Parks Department, the Sewer Department, and the Water Department. Each functional area answers to an elected superintendent or an elected board and commission. The Highway Superintendent is an elected official. The Board of Water Commissioners, Sewer Commissioners, and Park Commission each appoint individuals to lead each department and exercise significant managerial control over operations. And the Board of Health handles trash pickup through a private contract. So for Public Works organization in comparable municipalities, the following is true. 9 out of 9 comparable municipalities have in some form embraced a level of consolidation of public works type functions. 7 out of 9 have a Department of Public Works with major functional areas under its purview. And of the 2 of the 9 that do not have a Department of Public Works type functions have been consolidated in some way, such as consolidation of highway departments to handle grounds, trees, and sanitation, or involve combined water and sewer departments. 7 out of the 9 appoint their director or superintendent of public works. 5 out of 9, with some level of consolidation, have their town administrator or manager appoint public works type department heads. And elected and appointed policymaking boards, such as water, sewer, public works commissions, were variable, but the majority were not involved in day-to-day management and acted more in an advisory capacity and setting sort of long-term policy. And then this is, as we did for finance operations and various comps, we did the same for work.
Excuse me, could I ask a question?
Sure.
So when you just mentioned that advisory board, does each group end up with their own advisory board, or if it ends up being a Department of Public Works, is it one advisory board for the whole thing of Public Works? Like, how does that, because right now
Sure.
we have all separate boards, so I'm just
Mhm.
curious.
So that can vary. Towns that have highway departments, they tend to not necessarily have a board for a highway department. For some of the towns that we looked at, some of your comparables, when there was a public works department, they had a public works commission. And you can see here, there is in Fairhaven, there's a consolidated public works department, and they have a director that is appointed by the Board of Public Works, but that Public Works is also an elected board. But at the same time, they're also not involved in necessarily day-to-day management, and they're kind of maintaining more of a relationship where they're making an appointment for a director. The director handles day-to-day operations.
I was just curious because it seems like if there's one advisory board for all of those separate functions that are consolidated, they might have more insight into things that happen across departments rather than each board being separate and concerned with what they're looking at. Is that something that you can talk a little bit about?
I guess it would vary on a case-by-case basis. I mean, if you have an elected policy board, you might get the opportunity for people to have a lot of information and a lot of background in that particular subject area. You might have somebody who's very passionate about being involved in the town, and they don't necessarily have the professional background, but they just want to have sort of a guiding hand as to what goes on in a public works department, if that answers your question.
I guess I didn't phrase my question well. I was trying to see if it's beneficial to have an advisory board that if you were to go to a DPW, would that advisory board be above the DPW and be able to make connections across all those departments? And would that benefit the residents of Rockland because it would be more consolidated?
I would say, generally speaking, there are many different sort of, in a best practices orientation, there are a lot of benefits to consolidation. One of them would be, if you have a town administrator who's checking in on various different departments, they have one report for a public works operation. It would be the director or superintendent of public works. And that superintendent of public works may or may not be accountable to a board. There may be a board that exists. There may not be a board. But that person is able to sort of create divisions across a public works department, and that director of public works or that superintendent of public works is, checking in with a water sewer department or a sewer department, checking in on, what goes on with highways or what goes on with grounds or what goes on with building maintenance division, hypothetically. So in that regard, those types of functions are being dealt with a little more holistically, and there's kind of more continuity. Is that getting more to the question you're asking?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right, and then I'll move on. So charter decisions for finance department. Some municipalities prefer to outline department organization in bylaws or designate organizational responsibilities to the executive branch in order to provide maximum flexibility to adapt to changing needs. However, the committee may wish to discuss potential charter changes and impacts on a finance department in the following areas. Should the treasurer and collector positions be combined? Should the following positions be elected or appointed? Town treasurer, town collector, or a combined treasurer collector? Should the Board of Assessors continue to be elected? Who should appoint the Director of Assessing? And should the charter outline additional financial procedures, consolidate a finance department under the direction of the town administrator, or designate the position of Director of Finance? And then the same for Public Works. Should the position of Highway Superintendent be elected or appointed as a Director of Public Works? Should current public works functions such as highways, parks, cemeteries, sewer, water be consolidated under the direction of a Director of Public Works, with appointments centralized under the town administrator and the director? Should the following boards be appointed or elected? Board of Water Commissioners, Board of Sewer Commissioners, Board of Park Commissioners? And should relevant boards be consolidated into a single Public Works Board? Should Public Work Board, elected or appointed, have authority over day-to-day operations and appointments, or focus exclusively on policymaking decisions? So these are some of the questions that you may want to be asking as you go forward and review the charter. And with that, any questions?
A question back on that. So
Yeah, sure.
Obviously we have quite a few boards, and most of those boards are a 3-member board, right? So if we were to look at consolidating, what would be your recommendation as far as a consolidated board where we have 3 members right now for, the water, the sewer, the park? If you were going to consolidate, what would be your recommendation, or what are some of the other towns doing on the size of that consolidated board?
As far as the question goes, sort of like how would you go about consolidation?
Yeah, so we have separate boards today, right?
Mhm.
So for the water, sewer, park, right? So let's say we were going down the DPW and we were looking at recommending consolidating that all under one DPW. So would we still continue to have separate boards for water, sewer, and park? or would we have a combined board for the DPW? And if it was a combined board, would that board be made up of more individuals than just the three that we have in each of those separate boards today?
Okay.
Does that
I
make-
guess I would have to say it depends on the kind of organization that you want to sort of create in the future. I mean, the important sort of best practices would generally be to take the actual functional department, create it essentially, and then fold as much consolidation in as you know the town would prefer, or as would be recommended by all of you. So there are some really baseline things like, you know, highway, grounds, parks, they generally kind of go together. And then depending on the different town that you go to, or depending on, you know, a given community, they may have existing agreements with, I know that Rockland has an agreement with Abington where
Correct. for
there's a
the
shared water
Yep.
district.
Yep.
So it might be more difficult to consolidate there. But no such, like, correct me if I'm wrong, what would be the relation? Is there a relationship with Abington for the sewer department, or is that, I know it is for water.
There is not, it's just water.
So you might find it's easier to fold sewer into a public works department than water because of existing agreements.
Gotcha. Okay.
Is there a reason why Board of Health is not included? Is that because it's become a segregated enterprise fund and that's why it's removed? Because there is a Board of Health that consists of 3 elected board members.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering why Board of Health is not included in this.
Generally, health departments are not, or health as a function is not really lumped in with public works.
Usually separate and distinct?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have a.
But Judy, I
unique-
think I'm sorry,
sorry.
I think as we look at this, you know, I think our Board of Health is probably very unique in the fact that they handle trash, you know,
Yeah.
even though it's an outside contractor.
Mhm.
Jim, is that correct? I mean,
Yeah, some communities do, it just, and a lot of it comes down to, it's always been done in such a way, so I get that there's sort of like a residual function of certain boards of health where they would be handling certain sanitation issues. It tends to be in the public works best practices that we came up with were informed by a lot of the work that the Collins Center has done previously. I spoke pretty extensively with a senior associate who spent a career in town administration and, you know, for many years was the director of a public works department for a large city in Massachusetts. Generally speaking, solid waste going to public works is considered
Mhm.
We also have the recycle center is managed by the Board of Health as well. Is that part of the trash function? Is that the way you look at it?
yeah, it's the term is used solid waste, so it kind of encompasses trash, it encompasses recycling.
And another thing that I noticed in your presentation so far is, and you might be getting to this, we don't have a town-wide maintenance department.
no, we don't. That's something that has been talked about for 10 years.
And that honestly, that can really depend on the town. Towns that do town-wide maintenance, it could be because they have, you know, the capacity to do it. Other towns, they don't necessarily have the funding or they don't have the facilities for a DPW operation to handle
Yeah.
something like that. So they have a different situation.
I mean, up until now, our biggest issue has been trying to be able to fund that. Because the only thing we have within the town is the schools have a maintenance department and that's part of the school budget and they maintain it. Unfortunately, each department head is responsible for the building that they're managing. So it certainly is a gap that we have within the town.
Mhm.
It is very
Yeah.
common for public works departments to handle.
Jim, if I may
Absolutely.
cut in for a second, I just wanted to make sure that you all don't feel too overwhelmed. It is not necessarily your job to solve all of the problems of the town with using the charter. some of these questions that we've given you, they're really jumping off points for you to have discussions about what is working, how the structure is working. With respect to the charter, some of the most basic decisions that you're going to make is whether the positions that we've included continue to be elected positions, if they make more sense as appointed positions, if we can walk you through some of the benefits either way on that. And when you're looking at consolidating departments, we've also discussed some charters leave the department, how the departments are going to flow and who the employees are and who the heads of the departments to be dealt with in bylaws or at another level. So this is a jumping off point for you to have these discussions, and kind of, you can go down individually through what you're currently doing. Is it working for you, or do you see some opportunities for change? You don't have to make a change. We can tell you that a lot for, today we're talking about finance and DPW functions. So we've kind of narrowed that down a little bit, and you can walk through some of those positions that are currently elected and see what can be changed in the charter. But we don't want you to feel like you're going to have to really understand all of these departments and all of their functions, although we can help you take a look at what's going on. You may also want to consider because this is a starting point and you have a way to go, you may want to consider inviting some of these boards to submit what they think would be a good practice going forward as well. You certainly want their input into it as you're making these decisions.
I totally agree with that. And I want to kind of revisit what Robin said. I think that consolidation, the most lucrative way to consolidate is for each one of the departments to get together and understand what each one does. I'm speaking specifically from the treasurer collector piece. Do I agree that most towns have a treasurer collector combined and that it should be combined? Yes. The question, not the question, but to reiterate what Robin said, the important piece of our work is the treasurer and the collector, albeit understandably are both work in a financial capacity. The two roles are vastly different. The collector role and the treasurer role are not in a combination. They work wonderfully, but the collector has a vastly different role than the treasurer has. To combine them and to consolidate them, I'm just bringing this out to the board that I would envision that if we were to engage in a conversation that would entertain that idea, you would probably need a department just as big as the two that we have now, which are 3 and 3. So it would collectively probably be a treasurer collector, then an assistant treasurer collector, then a collector position, the 2 collector positions on one side and 2 treasurer positions on the other, to really give a comprehensive, total, complete department that functions, because we're kind of springboarding and kind of free falling here at this point, because we've been so not disjoint, but so segregated, that I think that, to go back to Robin's point, it's going to take a pretty decent measure to combine the two. While I am for it, I agree with it. I think treasurer and collector should be combined. There's a lot of digging to figure out and bringing in both sides of the equation to say, okay, what is this going to actually look like when we build the charter? How is this going to look? And how is it going to be constructed as far as an org chart? Because even, and I think I spoke about it at the last meeting, even the MCTA still segregates collector and treasurer. You still get certified as a collector, and then you get certified as a treasurer. You don't, it's not combined because there's such distinct roles. I hope that makes sense.
All right, Judy, I'll just kind of chime in a little on that. Now that I'm a treasurer and a collector, I'll just give you the lay down how the offices are set up, or my office is set up in Mansfield. We do it with 5 people. We have myself, the assistant treasurer collector, someone who focuses primarily on payroll, and then we have two clerks who do both the what you'd call the collector stuff as well as the treasurer clerk stuff. So we manage to do it with 5. We also outsource some stuff like but we'd still do a lockbox, etc. If we brought all that stuff in-house, we might agree we might need a 6th person, but we do it with 5 in Mansfield.
Okay.
All right, any other questions or?
I have a question. Just going back to the boards and whether they be appointed or elected, for policy making, what would be the point of a board that doesn't have control over the employee that they kind of, I don't want to say manage, but it's, how would that work? If they're setting a policy that doesn't jive up with what the town administrator wants, or do you get away from all that conflict for having that, or is that just set up a new way to have some disagreements? So
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a way to set up disagreements. The function of the board would essentially be to offer levels of guidance. And that's also, in some instances, these boards are appointing the director of public works or
okay,
the
that would make
comparable.
more sense to me. Yeah. So okay.
I would say that, and also to a certain extent, I mean, there are some boards where that works well, and then there are other boards where, maybe they're executing contracts, that kind of thing. And then there are also boards that don't necessarily have the appointment power, but they're there as sort of a citizen check on the department, just sort of like as a general minding of the store. And if it rises to the level of this board feels like it's an untenable situation, there's recourse through the town administrator or the town manager's office who might be doing the appointing of a director. It's probably an indicator of an issue if there is an appointed board. Hypothetically, if there's a public works commission and there is a DPW director, and anytime the board and the director get together, it's just fisticuffs endlessly, it's probably an indicator of something not going well. And it would be an indicator of a broader problem that would be addressed through, a more centralized format for how the department is set up. Let's say hypothetically, if the town administrator is making the appointment of the director as opposed to that board. But
Okay.
those are the kinds of that we can give you lots of information. We can give you sort of like, I would just say the research and the information on best practices. There are certain value judgments that communities make when they make these decisions, and the value judgments are entirely your own.
Jim, I got a question on the communities that you were using as a comparison. Do you know if any of those any of those towns have committees that have the power to appoint and terminate?
Some do,
Okay.
others
which-
do not.
Do you know which ones? How many of them have that?
Let me get back to you with exact numbers. I do know that
Okay.
there were some in the comps that they had a public works board. There was at least one that had a public works board that hired and fired the director.
All right, it would be good from a comparison just to see what.
Right. And that also, I mean, I'd have to double check, but sometimes you have an instance where the public works board makes the appointment of the director, but the board is appointed and they're not elected. And the appointment is made by,
Okay. Okay.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. So that would make it different too. Okay.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
And on the heels of what Rich just said, it linked a question that I had about, if I'm an appointed financial director, how do unions play into all of this? Like, is my staff, could my staff be comprised of union members, of which do I have any direct say into the hiring and firing, the personnel reviews of all of the members, or does that change?
I would ask, what is the union relationship I mean, what is the level of unionization hypothetically in a treasurer's or the collector's office in Rockland now? Is there a unionization?
Yes.
Is there a yeah,
Yes.
okay.
With the exception of the assistant who is appointed, the clerical are part of the union.
Well, the appointed assistant is also a member of the union, aren't they, Judy?
I'd have to check that, Robin. I'd have to check whether or not, because technically by the Mass General Law and the charter, and I can only specifically speak for my department, that the assistant is appointed by the collector, who is an elected official, but the clerical member is a part of the union.
Right.
I was going to say, Anthony, if you want to jump in, I see you have your hand up.
So that comes a little dicey.
Yeah, I was just gonna chime in on that point. So ultimately, whoever has the appointing authority, whether it's the board or the department head, generally does the hiring for firing. In the daily management, ultimately in these types of situations, you can kind of think of the department head potentially in sort of a middle management role almost. It can be a little complicated to sort of think about, but you're running the day-to-day. If you look at the chart, it talks about the day-to-day operations of the department for theoretically, we're talking about the consolidated DPW. That would be described either in their charter or in ordinances, and you'd have authority obviously under the charter, but also under whatever the terms of the CBA is to do that hiring and firing. You have to be consistent.
So would that have to be written into the union contract per se? Because right now, I don't want to belabor the point, but I think in terms of grievance processes right now, where it's all handled by the union in sync with our human resources department. So in melding the different departments, how do we then consolidate that whole piece as well to accommodate the union contracts as well as whatever our human resources person brings to the table as an appointed official?
Yeah, so I guess I'm gonna have to speak from the perspective of being in cities and not towns.
Yeah.
But it would really follow the same method you outlined. If all of the grievance process, if I understand correctly, the unions are the CBAs, the union contracts are negotiated by the Human Resources Department.
No,
right?
it's by a specific union in sync with our human resources.
Yeah, but I'm saying with the Human Resources Department representing the city.
Yes,
the town. Excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah. So that process would remain the same, and the department head would participate in any grievance process as outlined in the collective bargaining agreement. It's
Okay.
yeah.
It does make sense. Yes, that clarifies it. Thank you.
Excuse me, can I ask a question? Are you concerned that if the treasurer collector got merged together, that there are two assistants and you'd only end up with one assistant treasurer collector? Is that where that question arrives?
No, not at all. I am under the full understanding that if you were to combine treasurer collector as John advised, that yes, in fact, it would make total sense to have an assistant treasurer collector, not segregate. If you're gonna consolidate. If you're gonna have a treasurer collector, then have an assistant treasurer collector. And then the legs underneath that become clerical, but those clerical positions are unionized, are union positions.
The assistant treasurer right now and the assistant collector are union positions.
Yeah,
That's
they're-
why I
they're
asked
both
the
union.
question.
Yeah, they're both in the unions. I agree
They are?
with that. Yep,
Yes.
Yep, they are. And some towns do keep assistant treasurers and assistant collectors. If, just because mine combined, it doesn't mean, every town has done that. And just to throw
Okay.
another little wrinkle out there, all the department heads in Mansfield, including the treasurer collector, are unionized. So that's another little thing to think about, is if we do go down this road, whether Rockland would, if those officials should be or would want to look into becoming unionized rather than being straight employees at will. But that's, I'll just throw that out while I'm thinking about it. So.
Food for thought.
Can we
Thank
get
you.
this, can we get this presentation emailed to us so that we have access to it?
Certainly.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. It's a very good presentation, by the way. Very thorough.
Thank you very much. I owe many thanks to the input of the team and everybody who worked on it.
I do have one other more curious question. At the state level, they still have constitutional officers like the treasurer, auditor, secretary, etc. What if the state? Why isn't the state going to a more corporate model, but kind of expecting the cities and towns to kind of go more of a corporate model? I mean, like here in Rockland, we have elected officials. To me, like the elected treasurer is a, a constitutional officer, so to speak. They offer some type of a checks and balances. I'm assuming at the state level, they have, the auditor, the treasurer, the secretary, etc. Why isn't the state looking at combining everything into a more corporate model, so to speak?
Oh, like instead of electing, like
Yeah,
the
why
state
do they
treasurer.
why do they still do all these elected constitutional officers, but cities and towns are beginning to do away with them?
For that, I don't know if I would necessarily wanted to speak to that.
Okay, that was just a curious question,
Yeah.
because if this is, I don't want to say if the state is kind of encouraging cities and towns to adopt a more consolidated corporate way of looking at things. So,
John, the state certainly hasn't encouraged us to do this. I think this is
Okay.
something that we've talked
yeah,
internally
no,
to do
this is just more of a
because
curious question. Yeah.
because of the challenges that we continue to have.
Yeah, and I'm not talking just
in a
specifically
function.
to Rockland. I mean, I don't know if the Collins Center was, but if the state was, maybe encouraging cities and towns in general to go this route. If that's not the case, then
I think that's an assumption that you make, and they certainly haven't approached
No,
us
it
about
was-
it.
okay. That's fine. It wasn't really an assumption, more of just a curiosity
Gotcha.
thing, because
Okay.
you would think that if that way is better, why isn't the state kind of taking that? But then again, it is the state, so who knows? So.
I just have a question for you. If we go back to the DPH grid or the DPW grid, there seems to be a fair amount of variability in how each town determined what was going to be under the wing of DPW. Is there any specific reason that you're aware of that towns chose certain things to still be elected and other things to not be?
Excuse me. Elected in terms of boards.
Well, if you go back and you look at Abington seems to have put everything onto one DPW superintendent, and all of that is appointed under that one DPW superintendent. But it seems like there's other pieces in other towns where they didn't put it all under one DPW superintendent. There are still pieces of it that are elected. Not necessarily, if I remember correctly, it wasn't necessarily the boards, but there were still certain pieces of it where someone was the park in charge of the park department or in charge of something else. Thanks for putting it back up.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you look at elected policy, I guess it is boards. There's a lot of variability in what they put under separate from Public Works versus consolidated. Look at Hudson versus Abington. Was there any particular reason why they split out certain things? Looks like Abington did pretty much parks, highway, parks, recreation, and sewer. Hudson has parks, cemeteries, forestry, streets, trains, sanitation, water,
Maureen,
sewer.
really?
When we get back to Board of Health, they've included sanitation in there. So just curious if there was any particular discussion around that.
I would say often it can come down to, you know, what the history of a town is and the level of consolidation that they could achieve. I think Abington is actually an interesting example because Rockland is involved in a water district with Abington.
Right.
And you'll see they consolidated all the functions except for water, but they also have a health department that handles sanitary solid waste, which, as I said before, historically, there has been a relationship between health departments or boards of health rather, and a sanitation function. That is changing. And it's also interesting in public works as well, because for financial organization, there's a lot more state guidance and there's more articulated sort of recommendations out there. For public works, there is sort of trends that have been monitored and trends that, you know, the Collins Center has picked up on, and also discussing it with public works professionals and people who have spent extended periods of their careers managing large public works organizations. But yeah, I mean, in any given town, it's been easy for, you know, certain communities, it might be easier to integrate certain functions as opposed to others.
Sure.
So I guess that would be the answer to that.
Because even taking Abington as an example, you look at, they have an elected policy board, water, which we've already discussed because it's combined with Rockland, but they elect the sewer commission or board, but the Parks and Recreation is appointed. So it's just, I guess it's just whatever they determine fits their town.
Maureen, if you look at it, most of the
Yeah.
elected
Mhm.
pieces, when you look at it, a lot of it comes down to water and sewer, not in each one. But Abington, for an example, so Abington sewer is combined with Brockton. So they go under
Right.
Brockton's policy. In water, it's combined with us. So it does it. I know a couple of these other towns have combined water and or sewer with other communities. So I think that may be the reason, like when you look at it, not everyone, but a lot of them are water and sewer. And I think because those are some combined with different communities because of need and necessity.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Pat, you had your hand up?
I did. I can't find my little raise hand function, so excuse me. I just did it in real life. So I believe in one of our earlier memos, we did include a chart for you to kind of walk through when you're thinking about whether a position should be elected or appointed. And ultimately, it is your choice what works for your town, but there are functions to consider. For example, the more technical and the more expertise that is required for a position, the more likely it is that a position or board is going to be appointed rather than elected, because you need to make sure that you have certain functions covered, that expertise is that you can find those people for those positions, and that it's not necessarily a policy decision. Where if a board is more about creating policies for the town that can be easily understood, and the town, and it's a matter of somebody figuring out what direction the policy of the town is going, those boards and positions are more likely to be elected than appointed. But when you're looking at technical positions or positions that require a lot of legal understanding of how to apply the state law in a matter, then that's going to weigh back towards an appointed position rather than elected. So we can walk you through those things. Another issue is really, can you find what you need within your town borders? So for example, have you had trouble finding qualified people to run for certain positions? If that has been the case, or if perhaps only one person has ever run for that position for the last 10, 15 years, the fewer qualified people you can find in your town, you may want to consider an appointed position where you're really looking at a broader base. Anyone who lives in the market area of your town can apply to hold that position. For some of these that are positions, not the boards. So there are a lot of factors to consider. And I think we had a chart in one of our earlier memos,
We
Jim,
did.
you probably
We
recall.
did.
We did.
And so that's one way to just kind of go through when you're trying to say, why are they doing this and why are they doing this? Well, maybe in some towns, they have a lot of really qualified people who are willing to run for election and have it really be a competitive experience where they're getting the most qualified candidate. Maybe in another town, people aren't as willing to run for election. And there are a lot of people who have a very special set of skills, even when you're talking about boards, who would love to bring those skills to a board, but just have no interest in running for public office.
Mhm.
So you really have to look at your town and the quality of the candidates and the appointments that you're getting. So there is not going to be one way to look at or measure these things. It's going to be different in every town, depending on who's in the town and really what the culture is and who's running for those positions.
Thank you.
And again, we're happy to forward the full presentation to the Charter Review Committee.
Can we get a copy of that chart she was just speaking of? Because I don't think I have that. Can you
Yep.
resend that? Thank you.
It was that was part of the original packet, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
so
just
this is one of our
looked
previous
through
memos.
mine. I couldn't, unless I'm missing it.
Because it also listed for our town, the positions that weren't competitive for elections, and those that had people that had stayed in positions for long periods of time, just as examples. So it was in
Maybe I'll
that.
find it in an email because I do remember seeing it. I just, for some reason, don't have it.
Let's
Yeah.
let Jim get back to the presentation.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, we kind of it pretty much wrapped up the last slide. My next slide was just sort of the thank you for your time.
And I'm going to echo Doug's response. Thank you very much for your time. It was a very comprehensive
Yeah, very good.
presentation, and I think moving forward, it's going to help us tremendously. I don't think I know personally, and I didn't realize it was going to be such an arduous task to take a look at and really, kind of almost disassemble what we have and reassemble it according to what works for Rockland. And I appreciate and I forgot the woman's name, I'm sorry. What you just reiterated was that it's, one size doesn't fit all. You're giving us kind of a nice overview of different towns, comparable towns, and this is what works for them. And so our job basically is to disseminate that information across ourselves and our boards and whatever, and really kind of take the role of, let's try to find something that fits for Rockland.
Yeah, and Judy, great point. I think when you look at those comparable towns, and I think it was Maureen who had mentioned it. Every single town is different, and my guess is when this is all done, we won't match any of those 9 towns. But I think the job is to try to come up with what what allows the town to function best, not only in the near future, but in the long term as well. You
Without
know,
a
and as we
doubt.
look at this, those are things that we got to look at is as the world continues to evolve and the town becomes larger and larger, you know, how do we allow it to function as best it can?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. Any other questions?
No.
No? All right. So, yeah, Jim, Anthony, Patricia, thank you very much. That was great. If you could forward that to everybody, I think that would be a nice reference for us to fall back on as we really start to dive into this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next thing on the agenda was discussion of potential charter amendments for future town meetings. I don't know how everybody else feels. We just got a whole lot of information, you know, from Jim and the team in that presentation. I'm up for either way we want to go, but maybe it makes sense to kind of take this and digest it a little bit. I don't know what anyone else's thoughts are, because there was a lot in there. There really was.
A lot.
I know my head's spinning a little bit. It's
Yeah.
I'm looking at things a little differently now than I think what I was, you know.
It's true. It does look like this is going to be a more complicated process because,
Yeah.
I would really also favor consolidating things into a public works department. And, you know, we have so many different little branches now that we're going to have to make into one big tree, if you will. And I think that is going to take some effort and some time. But I think, I mean, we all also have to remember that, you know, we're making these proposed changes, not just for the sake of change, but to make town government work more efficiently and work better for the residents of the town. So yeah, there is a lot to digest, but I think there's a couple small things I think we could do. I am interested in one particular small section of the charter regarding basically what are minutes of meetings of the various boards and committees. On Article 2, C 2.01, letter H, it just says that every town board, commission, and committee shall keep a journal of its proceedings, which journal shall be a public record, which everybody does in terms of keeping minutes. In going through the town website and going into the agenda and minutes section of the town website, some committees and commissions are very good at posting their meeting minutes. Others, you can't see a thing at all. And I know in examining, for instance, I looked at Abington's charter committee. They have a charter segment which requires minutes to be published within 60 days. I don't know if it's appropriate for us to perhaps put some kind of a time period after which minutes are approved at a meeting, that they should be made published, if you will, put on the internet, put on the town website within a certain period of days, say 30 days. And I don't know what the process is for putting minutes on the website and who actually has to do that. I know in trying to find information about what some committees and commissions are doing in town, and if you do go to the minutes section on the town website, a lot of times you can't find any record of what they did unless you go on WRPS if they were recorded and you watch the meeting yourself. So I don't know if that's something appropriate we should do in putting some kind of time period that boards and committees are required to issue their minutes to be available to the public. I don't know how anyone else may feel about that.
I think it's a good idea. Could we add stuff like the slides we just looked at too, so the public can review what we're looking at?
If,
So we do-
if that's possible, sure.
So minutes do fall under the guideline of the state. The state
Mhm.
makes it very clear what are to be on minutes, and they really are not. Minutes are not designed to be detailed. They are
No, no.
designed to be higher level. And then the detail is, how does the town, whether it's on a website, whether it's on, YouTube, whatever it is, one of the challenges I know we face as a town, and this has been said many times, we just don't have the capacity and the manpower and the funds to tape every single meeting.
Mhm.
So then the minutes themselves, as long as you fall within the state guidelines, don't give you a whole lot of detail. So, we could look at, talking about making it mandatory to post it within a certain amount of time. But then you got to go back to, how do you enforce that?
Yeah, yeah.
And if you have elected boards, we can't enforce that. If you have an appointed board, you have the ability to enforce that much better than if it's an elected board, because the elected board technically reports to the people who elected that board. So it kind of goes back to some of the challenges that
Yeah.
within the structure and how we are.
For instance, there are no minutes of the school committee anywhere. So
They,
the more, I
hold on,
don't know,
have
I
you
go
checked
on
have you checked the school website?
the town website, the town.
No, it's
web-
not, it wouldn't be on the town website. It would be on the school's website. School's a separate entity. It wouldn't be on the town, it would be on the school. I've never checked, but
Yeah,
I'm assuming that it's on the school website. That would not be on the town website.
Hmm.
Schools
Okay.
are totally separate. So
yeah,
even as we're talking here, none of our discussions will include anything regarding the school.
Can I make a comment about the attachments and exhibits with minutes? So the state allows for you to keep copies of those with the minutes. You don't have to publish them. You can publish them, but they do have to be kept with the records, with the actual minutes in case of a public records request. Someone could request those handouts, so we do keep them, and it's up to each individual board whether they publish them along with the minutes. Just to answer your question that you had earlier.
So what is everyone's thought process right now? Do we want to get into discussions? This is going to be, listen, we're going to be together for 2 years.
yeah.
So that's, we're not going to solve it tonight. We already know what's going to be on the, for this year. So there's nothing else happening until next year at this time as far as going on there. So that's why we kind of started when we did, and we have some time. If we want to go down that road, we certainly can. Or does it make sense to digest everything that we just got tonight? I'll leave that up to you guys.
Can we, going back to Patricia Lloyd's suggestion, can we start scheduling interviews with board heads to get their input on the whole election appointed?
Yeah, we can certainly do that with the different,
Yeah,
so I think,
I think that would help
I
us make a decision.
a thought I had because there's so many different moving parts and arms here, is that we probably look at picking one area to start with of focus and work on that. So, whether it's, in the two areas that we've talked most about is a potential consolidation of the financial team, or potential consolidation of the DPW. My thought is we pick one of those
Mhm.
and we start working on that. Because if we try to bite off both of them at the same time, I think we're gonna go down a path that doesn't get much accomplished. So I think we pick one or the other, we work on that, we vet through everything there, and as part of that process, whatever boards are involved in those two entities, we can look at having them at various meetings. We work through the whether it's the financial or the DPW. When we come to what we think is a plan going forward, then we look to tackle the other. I don't know what everyone's thought is on that, because I think if we try to do both at the same time, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure.
I agree.
Agree.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think what you're saying, Rich, is I think the most important piece, or at least what I'm hearing, and the one that is most glaring, is the financial piece. And I think it's the one that requires the most attention and biggest scrutiny, because I think that, and I'm just thinking in terms of the work that needs to be done in order to really create that as a cohesive plan moving forward. We have to keep in mind that that plan has to fly with the general populace of, it's not just us agreeing that it should be a treasurer collector position. It's us comprehensively saying this is why. So,
Well, and that's just one piece of it, Judy,
I know,
right?
that's just
I
one,
mean, how does
that's
it?
one tiny piece of it.
Right, it's like, so from assessing to accounting to how does it tie
Exactly.
into the town
Exactly.
administrator to, yeah, it just.
And as Doug will attest, I know he's not here right now, but we do have monthly financial meetings, which includes both appointed and elected. It includes our assessor, our accountant, our treasurer, myself, the assistant town administrator, and the town administrator, to go through all of the financial workings of what's going on.
Judy, does that include the school?
It does not include the school, and that's a very good question, because I wondered why.
Because that was an interesting point. Well, I think because the school's always considered separate,
Right.
but in Jim, in your presentation, you actually had
It
with
was
some of those other
comprehensive.
towns with a school, and honestly, they take up,
Yep.
they're 40+% of the budget.
Right.
Yeah, and that was guidance that had come from Division of Local Services. They
Okay.
put out a white paper
And
on
that's right. And
financial
that's
management
actually,
team.
we actually worked pretty zealously on the recommendation from the Division of Local Services in order to, it was one of the mandates, and it should very well have been, in order to retain our Moody's rating, that the town needed to adopt and formalize a financial policy across the board. And so the five of us got together on probably each meeting that we just had over the last 3 months was specifically designed to focus just on that. We need to put this, button up what our financial policies are, including, fraud, collection, revenue, recap. It went through the whole 9 yards. And I think that's the important piece of what that document is going to help us as kind of a benchmark as to where we ultimately end up where to go. But I agree with you, Rich. It's the combination piece is the tip of the iceberg. The rest falls from there, but at least it's a start.
Okay. So if everyone's in agreement, why don't we do that is we'll get this presentation. Let's do a little homework, and then when we come back for our next meeting, we'll dive into the financial side of it. And start having, so in the first meeting, we'll start having some conversation, see if we can come to some common thoughts with the help of Jim and his team. And then from there, look, either that next meeting or the next, depending on how many boards that we look to bring in, then the meeting or the two meetings after that, we'll look to invite some of those boards and start to get some of their thoughts and input. Does that make sense as a kind of plan going forward?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And in,
Okay.
and in full disclosure to the board, when we delve into the treasurer collector piece, I need to recuse myself. I can offer my advice. I cannot vote on anything that it could be a conflict of interest in the role that I'm currently serving. So I just wanted to make that a full disclosure out there, that there will be times when I will not be able to engage in any sort of conversation when it involves treasurer collector.
You got it.
So
Well,
how many boards are there with our financial team? I can only think of the Board of Assessors. So would we want to speak with them? Would we want to schedule them while we're looking at the financial consolidation?
Yeah, I think we want to have a meeting where we can have open discussion
Yeah,
on it. And then the following meeting, look to bring them in.
okay.
And you're right, Robin, they are the only financial leg that is an elected board that has an appointed person sitting on the financial team.
So I guess I have a question then for the Collins team here. Do other towns have a board of assessors with an appointed assessor in that matrix that you had put up earlier?
Are you talking about generally, or are you talking about specifically the comparable municipalities?
The comparable municipalities.
And so when we did appointed financial officers, we were really just talking about explicitly collector, treasurer, director of assessing, and auditor or accountant, town accountant. So it really precluded boards of assessors. It's still pretty common on smaller towns to have an elected board of assessors. Actually really recently worked on a report, financial management report for the town of Belmont. And we had somebody who had spent a significant amount of their career at DLS, specifically with certain types of assessing issues. And there is anticipated to be kind of a drying up in the field of people who are engaged in assessing work. It's just a discipline that people aren't really getting into. So specifically for the town of Belmont, the team came up with a recommendation where the Board of Assessors would end up being an appointed board, but the Director of Assessing would actually be a member of the board, the person who is running the department. So their expertise would sort of be balanced out by two other people on that board. So it's an interesting issue. It's a little more complex, and we precluded the boards of assessors for different comps for that reason from appointed positions and appointed financial officers. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and it makes me curious about other things, but I'm not sure if our assessor, who is appointed by the board, is a member of the board. Does anyone know that answer?
He's not.
They are not a member of the board.
She is not.
No.
So that's interesting. That will give us something to think about, where the other town, that person is a member of the board.
But our board is elected. It's not appointed.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah,
Yep. So,
that was an arrangement explicitly for an appointed board of.
Yeah.
okay.
Actually, I have a question since Jim is still here. With our elected treasurer and elected collector, how have other towns, if they made the transition to either combine those two or to move them from elected to appointed, work it so that if you're elected to a 3-year term, do you need to let that term run out? How have other towns kind of handled that aspect of it?
That's a change that doesn't necessarily have to happen immediately. There can be sort of an attrition situation. Hypothetically, you have 2 separate positions. One's a treasurer, one's a collector, and there's a vote and there's the discussion, and there's a decision made that they're going to be combining the positions eventually. The term, they might let the term expire. There might be somebody who keeps running for election, does a great job, and they craft the change so that that person kind of gets to run for as long as they want to, and then the person who comes after them is an appointed person in a combined position.
Okay.
So it can depend, but you can gear it in a way so that not necessarily anybody is forced out of their position immediately.
Okay. Yeah,
If that makes sense.
It does. The reason why I'm asking is both positions are up for election next year. So I just didn't know if that meant we had to wait another 3 years for that term to run out before we could even implement any of this. But who knows, it might take us that long to even agree on how we're going to sell it to the town. So
Correct.
I was
Exactly.
just also going to mention, at the end of the charter, there will be a transition section. So there'll be a whole section of the charter at the end that deals with how you transition to make the changes in the charter. You can
Okay.
decide on what the effective date is, and then you can decide on, once you get there, you'll be able to take a calendar and look ahead at, when is this likely to go in effect? What election schedule will this be on? And how should we move into the next chapter when we make these transitions? So
Okay.
that is definitely something that we will work on at the end of this in this transition session. At the end of our discussions, when you make your decisions, you can really plot it out on a calendar at that point and include that in the language.
okay.
John, did I understand what you said correctly, that the treasurer and the collector position are on the ballot at the same time to be renewed every 3 years?
Yes.
Yep.
So I'm surprised we haven't had a problem with that, because we could effectively end up with a new treasurer and a new collector at the same time,
We have.
And a new clerk. Yeah, all 3 are on the same
and
schedule.
the
which
clerk
I
at the
always
same
thought
time.
was insane that they should have been staggered, but that's a whole other thing. Yeah, no, it's
This
Wow.
is Robin. This is why we're here.
yeah, yep.
All right. Any other questions?
I'm good.
No,
All
That's it.
right. If not, then yeah, let's we'll do it a month from today. We'll I'm gonna check with Doug, but I am hoping that we do it live. I know tonight, I think they had a finance committee meeting and something else going on because of coming up to town meeting. They had to finish up on the finance side, so there wasn't any room for us to meet. But we should be fine next time. So we'll look to go back live at the end of April. All right.
okay.
So is that April 25th?
You're gonna make me look, aren't you?
Robin, come on, you got the schedule.
It is April 25th.
What's
Yes.
the last Friday in April, Robin?
Listen, I don't
Honestly,
even know what today's
Last
date is.
Tuesday,
That's-
Tuesday.
Yeah,
All I know, it's the
Right.
last Tuesday in
last
April.
Tuesday.
April 25th. All right.
Okay.
I'm just messing
Um,
with you, Robin.
I know you are.
All right. So with that, I will make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Did we have a first, a motion?
Oh,
You said you made a motion. That's what kind of threw us, as opposed to
Yeah.
entertain a motion.
Oh, entertain a motion. Sorry.
I'll make
I'll-
that motion.
I will second it.
All right. So Judy, sorry about that. So
That's okay.
Judy and John, and I will I'll do a roll call. So Robin,
Yes.
Doug,
yes.
Judy,
Yes.
Maureen,
Yes.
Pat,
Yes.
all right. John,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
and myself, yes. All right, so Jim, Anthony, Patricia, thank you very much.
Thank you so
And,
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys next month.
Excellent. We'll send that presentation along.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.